Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And I'm so excited to introduce you to Cassie today. She is one of my new friends. We met one time like in the middle between Fayetteville and Goldsboro. And then I went to Fayetteville one time to visit with the Mrs. T. And I said, hey, I'm going to be here. You want to meet up? And then you came down here and I did a tour guide. So Cassie, welcome to the show. I love if you guys notice, if you're watching, you'll see the background. We have some dogwoods. And why is that the reason? Why did I put some dogwoods in the background for you, Cassie?
So I'm the blogger at Where the Dogwood Blooms. And I talk about North Carolina and you know, the dogwood is our state flower. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself before we start talking about Where the Dogwood Blooms.
Okay, so I am from North Carolina. My family is from North Carolina, both sides, going all the way back to when North Carolina was first settled. I grew up in two different cities. So I grew up in Canton, North Carolina, and Wilmington, North Carolina, which has two very distinct and diverse cultures. Mm-hmm. And I married right out of high school. We've been together for 20 some years. We have two daughters that we homeschool. Yeah, that's about it. And then I spend the rest of my time blogging
and taking care of your dog. We have to give Axel a shout out.
I'm actually a little worried because he's up right now and he barks a lot. So if anybody follows the blog, you know, I have a Doberman puppy and Dobermans are very loud. So if y'all hear him bark, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Like I said, it's real life. It's what happens. It's what happens when we have genuine conversations. So let's talk about Where the Dogwood Blooms. Why did you decide to focus? Because I know you originally were blogging about other things, but then you decided to do Where the Dogwood Blooms.
Right. So I used to do a blog about genealogy, which is really how I got interested in North Carolina history and all these different kinds of things, legends and historical sites. And when I was doing that, I found a blog called The Blind Pig and the Acorn. And she writes about Appalachia. And I had been away from the mountains for a really long time at this point. And her blog is so beautiful. It feels like going home. Like whenever I open her blog up, there's always stories, there's recipes, there's all these different things that is all about the mountains. And I thought, how great would it be if there was a blog that was about North Carolina that was like that didn't just talk about the mountains, but talked about the beach and talked about, you know, all these different places in between. And it kind of started there. And then years later, I was on the Nextdoor app and someone had posted a photo of a bobcat that had been run over, and they weren't from here. And they didn't know what it was. They thought it was a mountain lion. And I was like, wow, there are so many people who don't know. They move here and they don't understand the culture and they don't understand what animals are here and they don't know all these different things. And that kind of motivated me. And after I responded to the photo, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to create this blog and I'm going to let people know, you know, it'll be a place where people who are from North Carolina can connect to things that they grew up around, and somewhere that people who aren't from here can go, okay, let me get to know North Carolina.
That is so true. And I know a lot of bloggers agonize over what they're going to call their blog. How easy was it for you to come up from Where the Dogwood Blooms?
It actually wasn't easy. I had a really hard time trying to come up with a name for the blog. So at dinner one night, I asked my whole family, I was like, what do you think? And my oldest daughter was, she started sending me different names over a couple of days. And she picked Where the Dogwood Blooms because of where the red fern grows.
Mm.
And she switched it to dogwoods because, North Carolina. And I thought that is so perfect. So that's how I picked my name.
I love that. Give a shout out to your daughter because that is a perfect name.
Thank you.
And your blog is so different from any of the other blogs I read because it not only focuses on the history, like you said, but it also focuses on like fire ants. And you just wrote a post this week about our existence. I mean, the fire ants in the South and North Carolina are horrible.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you actually bring that out because a lot of people don't want to focus on the bad things that may happen, but you want to give it context. You want people to be aware of when they come to the state, the good and the bad.
Right. And I don't necessarily, don't get me wrong, I'm terrified of fire ants. My sister fell into this is in the blog post. My sister, when she was little, very little, she fell into a huge fire ant mound and she had to be rushed to the ER. She almost died. And since then, I'm afraid of them. But I grew up with them. So they're a part of what I've been around and what I know. I don't think I would want to get rid of them entirely. I'm sure some people would, but they kind of make up what is North Carolina, just like, kudzu. Kudzu takes over everything, and yet the flowers smell so good. It makes the landscape kind of hauntingly beautiful. It's not something that I would necessarily want to change, but it is something that people should be aware of.
That is so true, especially if you're walking around in flip-flops during the summer and you come across that pile and you think, oh, nothing of it. And then boom, it's like they're swarming on you.
Yeah. And if you're from Western North Carolina, there's no fire ants there. They're getting closer. And I believe there are actually some that are coming in from the Tennessee side. But where I grew up, there were none. So even living in North Carolina, if you've never been to the coast or you've never been to the middle of the state, you probably have no idea the havoc that they wreak down here.
They wreak a lot of havoc. Now, I like the fact that you cover not only that, but you cover places to travel and also the local lore and the local legends. I think that's so cool because you always want to know a little bit more. Like for instance, Gracie and I are going to Charleston to meet up with Maddie this weekend. And I want to know all about Charleston. And so we're going to go on a ghost tour and stuff like that. But you did the local lore. And I think that's so cool. How do you make the criteria? Okay, this is what I'm going to cover on the blog. This is the local legend I'm going to cover.
So I am very, I don't want to say organized because I have a giant list that has probably 1,000 things on it that I want to write about. And one day I'll just be like, okay, this is what I'm going to write about. Because there's so much to cover. There's legends, there's history, there's animals, there's people. When you're from North Carolina, I feel like, or from anywhere, you get so blinded to the things around you. You know what I mean? Like fire ants. You just kind of get used to them and you don't pay them any attention anymore. And I want to bring those things to the forefront. I want you to pay attention to those things. I want you to notice that this is a different place.
Do you think growing up from two different parts of the state, the mountains and the coast, like you said, distinct cultures, that's the reason why you want to bring awareness and you want to write about this stuff because you've experienced two different cultures?
Right. So, which is very... I think people have a hard time understanding it. My daughters, we go to the mountains once a year, every year. And they notice that my accent changes when I go home, but that's how I spoke, the first 15 years of my life, 10 years of my life. I had a very heavy, thick Appalachian accent. And so when I hear it, it just automatically turns on. And then after I come home, it takes a few days for it to kind of tone itself back down again. And my daughter was like, "You're code switching." And I was like, "I'm not code switching. It's part of who I am. Like, I can't help it. Like when I hear it, it just naturally, you know what I mean? And it's not thick and it's not overly, but they hear it. I don't notice it. But there is a huge difference between beach culture and Appalachian culture. And I grew up very, very aware of that because my time was heavily split between the two places. Um, the way people talk is different. The my family in Wilmington is very very laid back and very um, just very chill, very beach kind of, you know what I mean? And in the mountains, people are very kind of shut off. It's very about family. There's a lot of storytelling that we do up there. And I think that that definitely inspired what I do now because I can see very clearly. And, there are actually other cultures in North Carolina that are just as distinct as the two I grew up in.
Mhm.
And I don't think that there's enough people talking about it and trying to preserve it.
That is so true. And right now we need to take a brief commercial break, but we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Alice Chun. I'm the inventor of the Solar Puff. This is the Solar Puff. It flat packs flat like an origami balloon, and you can pop it open and you get a beautiful cube of light. No batteries needed, just the sun. And we are using this for PTSD therapy with children in Ukraine, and now I'm going to Turkey to deliver these to the earthquake victims. Solite design, and this is the Solar Puff.
And we are back with Cassie. You mentioned in there storytelling. Now you are also going. Have you already gone? Are you going to the mountains to do like a storytelling that I know you're really nervous about?
I am super nervous about it. So I'm going to the Highland Games this year, and that is right after 4th of July. And I'm going to be doing some Appalachian storytelling for the Cochran family.
And so tell us what that entails. I mean, how did you get the offer, and then how did it, unfold and everything?
So on the blog, I tell a lot of really personal stories about growing up, like earlier about my sister, those kind of things. In Appalachia, when you're growing up, people always think that storytelling is all based on folklore and this, and it is. There's parts of it that way, but really it's your family kind of gets together and they tell their memories and their stories about neighbors and local places, and they just share their memories. And we lived on a cattle farm beside my Papa Cochran, and Papa Cochran would walk through the cattle field every day, and he would come visit my grandparents, and he would drink a cup of coffee and he would give me candy, and they would sit around and they would tell stories about our family. And I grew up my entire childhood listening to, them talk about what it was like before there were cars. Or my grandmother was so short that she wasn't allowed to attend school. When she turned 5, she wasn't allowed to go to school with everyone else. And I know all of these incredible things about my family because, from my great grandfather to my grandparents, my dad, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, we all do this. And I think my kids were about probably 10 when they first realized that like this kind of magic happens when my Appalachian family gets together. It'll be like we're all sitting around a fire and everybody will be chit-chatting, and then all of a sudden stories start getting told and everybody starts laughing, and it's just this really good time. And to me, that's what storytelling is. And so when I started writing the blog, if for people who read it, like I tell a lot of these stories when I blog, and I'm constantly talking about the mountains because I spent the first 8 years of my life there. I went back every summer. I still go every year. So I talk about it a lot. And I was posting about my, memories of my great grandpa and, my mama and papa. And someone from Clan Cochrane reached out to me and they were like, we would love it if you would come and tell stories for us at the Highland Games. So I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. So I'm heading up there very soon. I am very nervous about it, but I'm excited too. I like to share stories about my family and growing up, so I think it'll be good.
Okay, so are you going to be in costume, or are you just going to go like a regular, or how is that going to work?
So I'm planning on we're going to take some chairs and set up to make me comfortable, like it would actually be, with my family, and I'm just going to tell the stories. And I asked her, I was like, do you want me to tell like the real stories, or do you want me to like water them down? And she was like, no, I want you to tell real Appalachian stories. And I was like, okay.
You don't know what you're in for. Do you think that storytelling that was passed down has made you more interested? I noticed when you write in conversations that we've had as well, that you research everything that you write about, that you really like go deep down into the history, into the depths of the history of what you write about. Do you think that came out of growing up around that storytelling?
Actually, I don't know where. Maybe my mama called her Woody family warriors. And when I was about 5 or 6, I remember her telling me that I was a warrior. I was like the Woody family, and I am. I'm a nervous kind of person. I'm very anxious. You spent time with me,
Yep.
Um,
I'm the same way.
and so when I was in high school, I started researching on the internet. If I didn't know something, I would look it up. I wanted to know everything, and that can be horrible because you can end up on places like WebMD. Luckily, my interests kind of lead me in the direction of good things mostly. So, yeah, I think that's kind of how it started. Is I have this thirst to know things that I don't know, and it ends up becoming like it's probably annoying for my family. Like we go places, and I'm like, oh look, there's a sweet gum tree, or oh look, there's a fox squirrel, or whatever, because I know all these weird random things that other people just don't really know. So like we'll go places and I'm like a tour guide, like I've lived there before and I've never even been. But yeah, it just comes natural, I guess.
I can so attest to that knowledge of you. You said you had a wealth of useless knowledge. That's what you said when we were taking the hike around Waynesboro Park, because you're like, oh, look, there's that, there's that, there's this. But then I taught you something on your iPhone.
You did. I use it all the time now. So I'll take a picture and look up what plant it is if I don't know what it is. So yeah, you've just added to my useless knowledge base.
Now, I love the fact that you travel to places. A lot of places, and you travel, but you don't expect to be paid to be traveled. You travel and you go places because you have that thirst. There's a lot of bloggers, especially in North Carolina, that want to write about the history or write about places to go in the state, but they always put an affiliate link or something in, and that's something with Pure. With you don't put that in there.
No, I don't. So I have I'm what I call a micro blogger. I have a small following, but they're very loyal and they're very active on social media. And when I go somewhere, it's because I want to know about it. It's something that I would be interested in reading about. So I don't know if I'll ever change format. Maybe we'll see. But for now, this is how I'm happy. This is my hobby. It's what I do. I'm a stay-at-home mom. Like I said, one of my girls has already graduated. The other one is not far behind. So this is what I want to do, so I don't really have to worry about writing about what someone else wants me to or highlighting what someone else wants me to. I write what I think other people actually care about. So that kind of gives me a certain freedom that a lot of other bloggers don't have.
So where do you think that thirst of knowledge, besides the storytelling growing up, to want to tell the stories about North Carolina comes from?
Well, so my mama was very, how do I put it? Mama was very smart. She read to me every day when I was little, and a wide range of things. Like she read to me The Boxcar Children, Gone with the Wind, like all these different things. And her and my papa would take me on trips. We went to the Outer Banks. They took me, all over Western North Carolina. I would visit my mom And then when I live with my mom has like this thirst for travel. Like mom took me everywhere. She took me to Washington, D.C. We went to Hawaii. We went to different places all across North Carolina. And so I grew up not only experiencing my own culture, but other cultures too. And because I grew up at the beach and in the mountains that have these very unique cultures to them, it made me appreciate others. And so I've just always wanted to know more. You know what I mean? So I just grew up with people who fostered that. You know what I mean? Like they wanted me to experience things and they wanted to show me new things. And I think that really kind of led to where I'm at now.
Yeah. You mentioned your social media. You have a huge following. I don't want to say huge, but you have a very interactive following on Twitter. I'm going to put your Twitter up there right now. But I also noticed that when you're going to a town, you're like, okay, I'm going there. What do I need to try? And I love the fact that you want feedback. So
right. I think it's like I said, I want to write not only for the people of North Carolina, but for people who are coming here or who are new here. And so I want to know what the locals want to do. You know what I mean? Like when I go home to the mountains, it always drives me crazy. And don't get me wrong, I grew up going to Asheville. Asheville is a beautiful place and there's a ton of things to do there. But over time, Asheville has lost its kind of hillbilly culture. And if you're from the mountains, that's a big deal. Like being a hillbilly is who I am. Like it is not completely who I am, but it's a big deal. And so if you're going to Western North Carolina and all you can talk about is Asheville, you're missing this genuine, authentic kind of experience of what it's like to be in the mountains. So when I go somewhere, I want to know, hey, you're from Goldsboro. What do you enjoy to do? What do you like to eat? Where do you like to go? And I want to experience those things, as if I were a local. And people respond to that. I actually had someone, it made me a little teary-eyed. He wrote me and he was like, I read your blog and it feels like home. And I was like, oh, like that is probably the most beautiful comment anyone has ever given me about anything I've ever written. And I've been blogging for a long time. And I was like, that's what I want right there.
I smell a tagline there where you feel like home or something like that. Now, you mentioned hillbilly culture. What is hillbilly culture for those that, because I immediately, when people think about hillbillies, they think about the Beverly Hillbillies. Right. So what is that for people that don't know?
So hillbillies, so let me go ahead and say, if you're not a hillbilly, don't use that term. People don't like it, but I am. And so, we are very family oriented. We're very in touch with the outdoors. Spending time gardening and hiking and these kind of things are very ingrained in our culture. We're very protective over our friends and family. We're very, for instance, a lot of people who homeschool their children because they want to teach through, religion, or because they, different things. For me, it was, I wanted to be with my kids. I wanted them to be at home. I wanted them to learn how to cook. I wanted them to know how to mow a lawn and how to do these different things. And it was like when they were going to public school, they were in school and then they would come home and then they had hours of homework, even when they were little. And I felt like they were being robbed of all these other experiences. And I thought there's got to be a better way. And I know that that comes from my background. I know that that comes from me growing up surrounded by Appalachian culture because I want to keep my family close. The feuding thing, I wish I could say that that's a joke. It's not. When you grow up in that culture, you become very, I hate to say it about myself, but I am one of those people, don't cross me. If you cross me, we're not probably ever going to get along again. And that was passed down to me. And I know that that can be a flaw in certain cases, but in other cases, it's not. It kind of protects me. You know, Appalachians are very, very resistant to change. And I think that probably also influences my blog. I'm very resistant to change. I like to preserve things, and I like to keep things somewhat stable and the same. Appalachian culture, I think, is a very big mystery to people who aren't from Appalachia. But the truth is Appalachians are very kind. It may be kind of hard to get in there, but once you're in there, they're very accepting. They're always willing to help. My sister actually came, and I wrote about this, and a tree had fallen in my yard, and it just missed my house. It just missed my car. And she drove all the way up from Brunswick County and brought a chainsaw and helped me clean it up. And that right there is like the epitome of Appalachian culture. You know, I can remember people, when cows would escape, the people on my street would get together and help my great papa get cows back into the field. It's very, very beautiful. I get very offended when people belittle it. It's not something that should be belittled. It's something that should be honored. And yeah, so I mean, it's different, but it's not bad different. It's good. And I want people to be able to connect with that and experience that.
It's like a sense of connection of being in a small town where everybody's kind of helping each other out. Like
Exactly.
back in the, I want to say back in the day, because back in the day, people were so willing to help each other, and neighbors knew each other. That's sort of like the culture, correct?
Right. I mean, the road I grew up on, I was literally related to everyone on my street. And I don't mean closely related. Don't get me wrong, I was closely related to some, but others, it was very distant. We're talking third, fourth cousins, but I was literally related to everyone on my street. And so we all knew each other. We all looked out for each other. And it's still that way. Like when I go back home, I still see Mildred, who lived across the street, you know, and I'm still related to everyone there. And so, yeah, it's very much everyone looking out for each other. And that's a beautiful thing. I wish there were more of that everywhere.
I think the world would be a better place too if there was more everybody looking out for each other.
Right.
So let's talk about what makes you decide to go to the places like you. I know you came to Goldsboro because I invited you down and said, "Hey, let's go explore in Goldsboro one day." But what makes you decide to go to the places? Because I know you and I have something in common. We're both kind of afraid to drive the big highways by ourselves. I am so guilty of that, and I 100% will be taking the back roads to Charleston. I mean, because 95 is horrible. But what makes you decide to go to these places, and what's your criteria for it?
I don't actually have criteria. It's usually so in the mountains, we rode around a lot. My dad would put me in the car and we would drive 45 minutes, an hour away and just go explore. And that's basically what I do. If someone invites me to, like I got invited to Elkin, I went up and explored Elkin, which was amazing. Elkin is beautiful. And then you invited me to Goldsboro. I have family in Brunswick County, so I'm usually going down there anyway. My mom lives in New Hanover County. I go there anyway. So I just, one day I'll wake up and I'll be like, okay, I've been trapped in the house too long. I'm going on a trip, and I'll load everybody up in the car and we'll go somewhere. And sometimes it's just to see a historic church, or just to go, you know, eat at a restaurant or whatever it may be, but we'll just get in the car and go because, you know, I get antsy and I'll go do something.
And I love it. How far in advance do you research? Because you said you get antsy and you just want to go somewhere. But like you said, either to go see a historic church, you obviously have to know a little bit about it. Have to kind of have in your mind a little bit of like a bucket list that you want to see.
Right. So like I said earlier, I have a list that has probably thousands of ideas on it of things. Like I looked up historic sites in North Carolina. And if I think they're interesting, or if I want to see them, then I'll just take the trip out and I'll go see it. Or if there is a legend somewhere And we went, I believe it was last summer, we went down to Holden Beach, and I made my husband take the back way and drive through Bladenboro because of the Beast of Bladenboro, so that I could take some pictures around Bladenboro. I do things like that all the time. I'll, kind of veer off to the side and be like, okay, I need to see this because I want to write about it.
Yeah. And which brings me to a story about you. The first time we met, you were like, oh, there were some beautiful cotton fields, because we met at the old North State Food Hall in Selma, and you're like, oh, there's some cotton fields. I'm like, did you get them? She said, no, but I'm gonna get them on the way back. And you got them on the way back. You just pulled over and took the picture.
Right. And sometimes I'll be driving through somewhere and I'll see this beautiful old falling down house, and I'll take a picture and be like, okay, I have to find out about this house. And then I'll research it. And if I find out about it, then I'll post about it. That's actually kind of what happened with, there's a place in White Oak, North Carolina. And for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of it right now. I'm so sorry. But I stopped, and we were on the way to Jones Lake. And I stopped at this old plantation house, and I was like, this is amazing. This is so beautiful. And so I ended up writing about it. There's a church between Fayetteville and Wilmington that I used to pass all the time. And it has this big, beautiful oak tree with a Spanish moss hanging down. And I was like, this is amazing. So I stopped and took pictures, and I wrote about it. I'm a dreamer. I'm easily, I don't want to say amused, but I get attracted to things. And so I'll usually just be like, oh, that is gorgeous. And I'll stop and take a picture, and then I end up writing about it.
How long is it from the time you take the picture to the time I've got to really sit down and investigate? Because you have to have some great investigative skills to be able to go down and research. Like if you saw a picture of a house and you took the picture, and you got to figure out where it was at. First of all, you're like, have to rack your brain, or do you make a note of where you found it at or where you saw it at?
So I always have my camera with me, and you know this because I've visited you, and I feel like it took me forever to get there because I kept stopping and taking pictures. There's probably, no joke, 6,000 or 7,000 pictures on my computer right now that I'm like, okay, I'm going to write about this eventually. One day it'll happen. One day I'll write about this. So I literally have pictures that were taken 3 or 4 years ago that I'm like, I'm going to write about this. I really am. I just don't know when.
I love that, because then on the times where, like, if another pandemic happens, or heaven forbid, are times where you can't go out, like the weather's bad and you really can't go out, you have that
right
stop. But how do you organize it? How do you keep it organized so you know what picture goes with what?
So Photoshop, the way that whenever you upload your photos to Photoshop, it gives you a date, and it'll have all of your pictures that you uploaded on that specific date. And so I'll label it where I was at, and then it'll have all the pictures. And so I'll know, okay, this was from my trip to Haywood County, or this was from my trip to Duplin County, or, this was my trip to Wilmington. And, so then whenever I need to pull up a picture, I can just go to one of those trips, and I know, okay, it's going to be in one of these Wilmington ones, or, which makes it easy to find and kind of pull up what I want to use.
I love that. Now, you said it could be anything that can just draw your attention. Like we talked about cotton fields. I know you took a trip, because I honestly didn't think I was going to actually be able to meet up with you because of stupid migraines. You need to write about the change of weather pressure in North Carolina. That is going to be one that like affects everybody, because one day it's cold, next day it's steaming hot.
Yep.
But how do you? Because I did not know, you never mentioned about wanting to go to Acock's birthplace, and then you show up there, and I'm like, wait a second, you're like less than 10 minutes away from my house.
So you're going to laugh at me. It's going to make me sound like I'm a little OCD. Maybe I am. So I have, like I said, I have a giant list of ideas, and that makes it sound like it's just kind of this big disorganized thing. No, it's not. It's, so my list is broken down by county, for places. And I have gone through and researched every county in North Carolina and all of the historic sites there and all of some of restaurants and different things. And so it's broken down by city. And whenever I go somewhere, I go, okay, these are the ones that I really want to see while I'm there. And so when I go, I kind of have a list that's been prepared for probably about a year before I even started the blog. And then it's broken down by, language, because I talk about a lot of other things other than just history or animals or plants. I kind of talk about our language. I don't know if you know this or not, but North Carolina is the most linguistically diverse state in the United States. And so I have different little sayings and dialects and different things that I want to talk about. And whenever I get around to them, all I have to do is reach over and grab it off the list and be like, okay, there you go. There's the blog post I want to cover this week. So yeah, I'm a little more organized than most others, I think. So it's not hard for me to go, okay, I'm going here. Let me pull up my list. Here's all the historic sites. Here's all the parks. Where do I want to go?
But I think also, too, maybe that might come to the fact that you're homeschooling as well, because I think having to research some of the stuff that you're teaching your girls kind of falls into researching where you want to go, because you can also incorporate that into your homeschool as well.
Right. We actually use a lot of my trips as homeschool trips. And so we'll take field trips, and this actually started years ago in Wilmington before we even moved to Fayetteville. We would go and we would take walking tours of Wilmington, or we would go to Airlie Gardens, or we would, go to Fort Fisher or whatever. And when I would have to research it before we went, and I would start while we were on the trip and they were having fun, I would be filling their heads full of all of the things about wherever we were at. Mm-hmm. And so that definitely plays a role in researching now, because, it started something. I'm like, okay, well, this wouldn't be that hard to transfer to what I do now.
And I love the diverse topics. Like you said, you got folklore, you've got places to visit, the fire ants, the other stuff going on. But you also, what's the other? Oh, my question just left me. See, you were talking about being nervous, and look, my question left me. But you also kind of make it so that the person that's coming along with you, it's like this. You're having a conversation with the person. That person is actually sitting down listening to you tell a story, instead of, because you don't write it in a way that it's like, oh, it's proper English and you worry about that. No, you write it in the way that Southern colloquialism is.
Right. So, like I said, I'm very inspired by Blind Pig and the Acorn. If you guys are watching this, please go check her out. She has an amazing blog. And I noticed that, because when I moved to Wilmington from the mountains, I was teased heavily about my accent and the way that I spoke, because, people were used to country accents. People were used to Southern accents. I sounded like I was from a completely different country, and people teased me and harassed me until I completely just lost my accent. I would be, when I went home, I felt safe to use it, but whenever I was in Wilmington, I didn't. And so when I wrote up until that point, I always wrote very, very standard textbook English. Mm-hmm. And after reading Tipper's blog, I was like, I don't have to do that. I can write the way that I would speak. I can say y'all, I can say yuns, I can, drop in the idioms that I would use every day. And it's going to help people connect with it even more, because that's how we actually talk. And not only do I write like that, I write posts about our language, because our language is actually very, very different, because we were so rural for so long. There are things that we say and pronunciations that we use that they don't use anywhere else. Like, I've heard it my whole life. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone other on TV say oil. We say oil. And that's for the car, for cooking or whatever. It's oil. And so when I'm reading, I read it in my own accent, and I'm like, okay, that sounds good. People, especially people from here, they're gonna connect with it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I use my regular vernacular when I write, and that was really inspired by her because that's what she does on her site.
Yeah. Case in point, on Twitter, you wrote aunt Cassie. And I said, oh, it's aunt too in the north. And you're like, yeah, I've never heard aunt except on TV.
Right. So, and actually in the mountains, when I was growing up, was aunt.
Aunt. Oh.
I had an Aunt Karen and an Aunt Janie and an Aunt Sandy. Or, we said aunt. But when I moved to Wilmington, it's aunt. And I don't think I've ever, in a real discussion with someone else, I've never heard anyone use aunt before. It even feels a little weird rolling off my tongue. But for people who aren't from here, I don't want them to be in a conversation and having no idea what we're talking about or no idea what we're saying. And I noticed my kids don't speak the way that I do. They don't use the same idioms that I do. They don't use the same dialect that I do. And that kind of bothered me a little bit. I was like, it's a little weird that they hear these things all the time and yet they don't use them. Or when I say them, they're like, what does that mean? And for me, I just naturally picked up on it. But it's almost like because kids today spend so much time on the internet, or they spend so much time with their friends who are from different places or whose family, don't adhere to the same kind of cultural standards that we do, they kind of lose that. And I don't want that to happen. I want people to be comfortable speaking the way that they grew up hearing it. You know what I mean? I don't want these words and things to die off. They're important to our culture. So I write about those things. I think it's something for people to connect with. And I've had people who are in their 60s write emails to me and be like, how old are you? Because I grew up hearing this, or I grew up doing this. And I'm like, I'm 40, I'm not quite where you are yet, but I had that same experience, and I think it kind of connects people for them to know, I grew up like that. And I know, and don't get me wrong, I know my kids grew up, pretty close to the way I did because we raised them pretty close to the way that we were raised, but they have lost some of the things that make us a little more unique and a little more diverse than everywhere else. And so I want to preserve that, and I want them to have that to hold on to. And I feel like a lot of people from North Carolina feel that way right now. Like, we have a lot of people moving in, which is great. It's great for the economy, and we're a very welcoming state, but we also don't want to lose touch with who we are. And I feel like a lot of us kind of feel, what's a good way, displaced almost. Wilmington, I love Wilmington. I was born in Wilmington. I spent most of my life in Wilmington. But when I go back to Wilmington today, like my mom, she was in a photography class. This was a couple of years ago. There wasn't a single person in that class outside of her who was from Wilmington. It's completely different place from where I grew up. And when I grew up there, it was a small coastal town. And when you go there now, the traffic is just atrocious. It's almost like a concrete jungle. There's roads it's just, and I still love Wilmington. It's home, and I still go back, and I still appreciate all of the things, but it's kind of losing touch with what drew people there in the first place. And that's what I want to highlight in my blog is, you can still grow, you can still change, you can still get better, but hold on to what makes us, what drew people in the first place, right?
Yeah, that is so true. Now, I want to ask you a question because I attended a live stream or a live podcast with Gracie. Cassie's named Gracie. She's
there live.
And people were like, hey, we're coming in from the people that were there at the podcast were coming in with such a preconceived notion about North Carolina that was so wrong. Why do you think that North Carolina gets such a bad rap?
Right. So North Carolina, and here's something important that a lot of people don't know. North Carolina has always been an evenly split state politically. So you've always had, with North Carolina itself, and we're not even talking about newcomers, we're just talking about in North Carolina. There has always been this kind of, what's it? I don't know a good word for it. Rift. And it actually, to me, helps keep us all very moderate and understanding of other people and other ideas, because, you know, for me, half of my family was very, very liberal and half of my family was very, very conservative. And so for me, I'm somewhere really close to the middle. And you know, if you have one viewpoint, you think, oh, this is awful. But if you have the other viewpoint, you're like, oh, this is great. And I think people view North Carolina from a lens that doesn't take into perspective that historically we have always been very, very evenly split. So that's unique. And as far as other states go, usually it's heavily one way, heavily the other. Here, you know, you're going to sit down at dinner and everybody's going to have a different viewpoint. I don't think that people who aren't from here realize that. They kind of want to put everybody in the same box, in the same kind of, you know, we talked about this. You know, there's this kind of perception that white Southerners are completely cut off from other cultures and other histories. And that is 100% false. That is not true at all. You know, my brother-in-law is Black. Well, might as well be my brother-in-law. And I love him to death. Hey, Dimitri, if you're watching. I have a Mexican uncle, Mexican cousins. I have, you know, Native American family. And this isn't new. This has been going on for decades, blended families and blended cultures. And so I think people kind of have this view of North Carolina as, oh, this is a Southern state who is, and they think all these negative things. And it's really that they don't know or understand our culture, which is another great reason that I write my blog. Is because I want to talk about, like, I wrote a blog post about seashells on tombstones. And there's two different cultural perspectives on that. And I wrote about them both because they're both important here in North Carolina. And one is from Africans and one is from Europeans. And I shared them both because, you know, depending on which culture you're a part of, this is why you leave seashells at tombstones. So yeah, I think people just, if they spent more time here and if they got to know more people here, I feel like their viewpoint would be different.
Yeah, that is so true, because I think this was like not the first time that I ran into it. I ran into it the other time when that author came, and she was like, she was really worried that we weren't going to have anything to talk about because she had a preconceived notion in her head what I was going to be like. And then when she found out that I am a part of a multicultural family, she was like, oh my goodness, you know, totally shocked.
Right. And that's, there you go, right there. You know, I've had people, you know, I bartended for a long time, and there was a lot of people, especially here in Fayetteville, who would come in, who would, you know, they grew up in, you know, California or New York or wherever. And they would have this idea that, you know, if you were a white person, you didn't like other races and you kept to yourself and you were, you know, and it's not like that at all. I've never seen it that way. As a matter of fact, I think that those preconceived notions are probably one of the most furthest things from the truth that I personally have ever experienced. And I think it's great to break down that myth about North Carolina, because it's not true. And so I feel like the more we talk about it and the more we highlight it and the more we share about, the different cultures and the things that and heritages that thrive here, the better understanding other people will have of it.
That is so true. Now, our time is almost up. Is there one last little nugget before we talk about where people can find your blog and where they can follow you on social media that you want to share?
I've started, I'm excited about this. People have started emailing me a lot. Like I said, I'm a microblog. I don't have this big, huge following, but I have this very loyal following. And so people have started reaching out to me and sharing their stories with me. I shared one recently about a gentleman. He was telling me about being punished for cussing when he was a kid, and his mom sprinkled cayenne pepper in his mouth. And I've heard stories about people getting hot sauce in the mouth or soap in the mouth. And so this is something I'm very familiar with. Luckily, I didn't get caught when I was a kid, so I never had to go through that. And I shared it on the blog, and a lot of people responded to that. Maybe not on the blog itself, but on social media, they kind of connected with that. And so people have been sending me stories, and I'm going to start sharing them because, I don't want to just share my own perspective. I want other people to have the opportunity to share their stories too. So if you're from North Carolina and you have something that you think would be interesting or you want to talk about, you can reach out to me and I'll totally post it.
You know what? That sounds like a podcast idea. Doesn't it?
It does. Very cool. Yeah.
Okay, so tell people what your blog is and where they can find it.
So I am Where the Dogwood Blooms.com. You can find me on Twitter, you can find me on Pinterest, and you can find me on Instagram.
And which one are the ones you're most active on, you would say?
So probably Twitter. But I'm pretty active on Instagram too. I tend to hang out on the stories a little more than I do with my actual posts. But yeah, I mean, I'll randomly be going through the grocery store and I'll see, moon pies, and I'll take a picture and post it. And
just posted it yesterday.
or see a picture of a lady carrying her pocketbook, and I'll post it and be like, this is pocketbook in North Carolina, because people, don't know. So I'll just randomly share a little knowledge with everybody.
I just love that. Now, what besides the storytelling event, what's up next for you?
Honestly, I'm not sure. This summer we're gonna hang out around home a little bit more. So I'm probably gonna do exploring a little closer to home. I want to come up and see you again so we can go to Cliffs of the News. I know there's a state park in Lumberton that I want to go see. And then the storytelling is the big thing though. So I'll have to make it through that before I do all the other stuff.
And you're going to do amazing because you just told your stories here with, you don't know who's listening. And if you just do the way you did our conversation, you're going to do amazing.
Awesome. Thank you, ma'am. I needed to hear that.
And you were so nervous to begin with.
I was really nervous. This went well though.
So guys, I will put in the show notes everywhere you can find Cassie and her blog, Where the Dogwood Blooms. Honestly, guys, if you want a little bit of Southern culture, you need to read this blog. I mean, I've learned some stuff. I mean, I was the only one in my family until my cousins moved down here that was actually born in the South. My parents were from Massachusetts. Everybody else was born up north, and I was the only one born in the South. So for a while there, I was lonely. I had the Southern accent that when we go to visit cousins, you get picked on. So I totally understand where you came from on that too, as well.
Yeah. I'm hoping it'll get more people in touch with Southern culture and North Carolina culture is really what I want, because, there's actually a difference between North Carolina culture and even South Carolina culture. We're a little different. So I'm hoping that, people who come here and they're looking for a place that can either teach them about it or they can connect and feel like they're home, that they'll come to Where the Dogwood Blooms, and I'll give them that. So,
and you know how you said that the blind pig and the acorn inspired you? Well, you've inspired me to write more personal posts as well. So
thank you.
So, guys, you will want to check out Where the Dogwood Blooms. I promise you will not be disappointed. It's a really great blog. She doesn't post often, so you can get caught up sometimes. Sometimes she posts a couple of times a week. Sometimes it's once. Sometimes it can take 2 weeks, just depending on what she has going on in her life. But
yeah, homeschool mom, I'll write as much as I can and get it up as much as I can. But yeah, usually I do at minimum 5 posts a month.
at minimum 5 posts. See, there you go. Cassie, thank you for coming on. Thank you for agreeing to come on, because honestly, you were like, I do not know. I'm so scared.
Well, I figured I needed practice for storytelling. So step in the right direction. If I can do this, hopefully I can,
You can do it.
do it live. Yeah.
And do you think you will on Instagram go live on your storytelling to share some stories? I mean,
So I don't know if I'll go live on Instagram, but I was thinking about filming parts of it and posting certain stories as I go along. I'm scared my family is going to be upset with me if I share the real story, if I share some of our real stories. So I don't want to post some of them on social media. I don't mind like telling people who aren't recording me, but other ones I think that people might find amusing or be able to connect with. So we'll probably record some of them and post them maybe later that night after we're done.
and if people are interested in going to the Highland Games and learning more about where you're storytelling, how can they get in contact? Just contact you?
Yeah, just send me an email. I'll be there that that Saturday and Sunday, and I'll be with Clan Cochrane in their tent. And I'll be sitting around and we're just going to tell some stories. So if you walk up and you hear me telling some stories, just come and stand and listen. And, hopefully other people will start participating too. We'll see. I'm hoping there'll be some other Appalachians there who are going to throw in, their stories. So, yeah.
I keep thinking the Highland Games. I keep thinking of the scene in Outlander. If you've seen that scene where, what's her name? Oh my gosh, I cannot remember her name. The daughter, Brianna. Bree goes, and they go to North Carolina and they go to the Highland Games and they learn a little bit about their culture and stuff. Do you remember that?
Storytelling is actually from Scotland and Ireland, and it was passed down generation through generation through generation, and that's how kind of Appalachian folklore and things got started. But it's also, like I said, it's very heavily influenced by family memory and family stories. So I know stories about my great grandparents that were told to me by my great grandfather and by my grandparents. So and this oral tradition, it's still alive, very alive today. I promise, I'm a part of it. So it's not surprising that they showed it in Outlander. But yeah, I'm hoping that when people walk up and I'm telling stories, I'm hoping that they're going to jump in and share some of their own. Hopefully there'll be a few people from Appalachia who'll be part of my family, and they'll be able to share some stories too.
I absolutely love that. So Cassie, thank you for coming on and for sharing Where the Dogwood Blooms.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So guys, until the next time, be blessed, and most importantly, keep chatting. Bye.